Welcome to the WeatherNation podcast. I'm Dakota Smith alongside Chris Bianchi. Chris, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being on here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to do this. This is fun.
We've sort of been talking about this for a while, and you reached out and you're like, I want to do the podcast. So
yeah, because we actually talked about doing this, for a little while. But I've been here for almost 5 years at WeatherNation, and seen all the fun things that have gone on here. But it's really fun to kind of sit down and actually talk weather. We're both, I think, pretty big time geeks when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So excited to get into it.
So this is your first show. So tell us a little about yourself so folks at home know who you are and why you're doing what you do.
Yeah, so I wanted to be a weather guy since I was 4 years old. In fact, one of the fun stories I always like to say is I actually learned English. My first language is actually Spanish, but I learned English by watching weather reports. So from about the age of 4 or 5, I always wanted to do weather. My mom would throw up the weather maps because she knew I would read those and absorb some of the English from it. And so that's partially how I learned English going to kindergarten, first grade. Learned some other words too, but literally my parents have scrapbooks of me writing partly cloudy when I was in kindergarten. So wanted to do it my whole life. I grew up in Southwest Connecticut, just about 45 minutes outside of New York City. So I know, like you, we're gonna get into this more, but nor'easters, my total baby. I love them. Grew up, lived for those big nor'easters coming up the East Coast, just praying they would close school.
Yeah.
And annoy my mother because she'd be like, I don't want the snow. And I'd be like, I want the snow. But long story short, been a total weather geek since about the age of 4 or 5. And here I am, living the dream.
Nice. We're going to dig into nor'easters a little later. So get ready for that. Yeah, I got some good stories, nor'easter stories. But first, let's dive into some of the top weather stories. Another busy week in weather, honestly. I think the biggest thing right now is that moisture plume that's just crushing the Pacific Northwest and California. Saw widespread, like 3+ inches they're expected to get. They already had some last week, and now they're going to get more. SoCal is actually getting in on a little bit of the action. I feel like the last event was more northern, but I know Southern California is going to get some rain. And the Sierra Nevadas, they're going to be measuring that snow in feet.
Oh my gosh. Especially out there by Mount Whitney, get up by Mammoth, they're going to probably get, as you mentioned there, you get above 7,000 feet in the Sierra. You're looking at 3 feet of snow. In fact, I was taking a look at some of these snow ratios so far. We're about 120% of average so far there in the Sierra Nevada. And it's really worth repeating how I think one of the things we really closely watch for when it comes to this California is the snow, because approximately a third of the groundwater, the drinking water there in California comes from the melted snowfall there come April, May, and June. So it's really important for them to get that snow. And a couple of things also is, of course, helps stave off the wildfires the following summer. If that snow melt, that trickle lasts into July and August, that's a really valuable source for groundwater that'll last deep into the summer months and stave off potential wildfires. So to get that snow, to get this early base going, I'm a big skier as well. Not just from the skiing aspect for the Lake Tahoe resorts where I'm sure they're doing cartwheels, but it's so valuable, it's so important for them to get this early season dump into snow. And again, you get into the central and southern Sierra, it looks like we could be looking at 2 to 3 feet worth of snow, and that's awesome.
I'm jealous of the people there.
I know.
I wouldn't want to travel in it, but oh man, that sounds good. Another story this week is we've had a few winter storms. Actually, we had a first one last week, sort of went through the Midwest. We got a little bit of snow from that, but they got widespread 8 to 12 inches across parts of Iowa and Illinois. Then that moved into the east, brought a little bit of snow to the northeast. But then it looks like we have another storm coming through. It seems like we're sort of in this pattern where we get these sort of big mid-latitude cyclones that sweep through. What have you noticed in some of the coverage that you've been doing about these storms? Are they like sort of quick, or how are they sort of coming in?
They've been, to your point, to kind of what you're saying, they've been so consistent. I think that's one of the hallmarks is we keep getting reinforcing shot of cold air, maybe a day or two in between, then get another reinforcing shot. So you've had these, we're locked into a January, February like pattern here. And what I find, I'd be curious for your thoughts on this too, Dakota, because I think it's really interesting the fact that this ridge out west pattern and this trough out east has been so consistent. But now that ridge out west is starting to break down, that trough out east is still kind of holding pretty tight. We're still seeing those reinforcing shots of cold air there. So places like Chicago, Minneapolis, on east towards the megalopolis. DC, wettest year on record, wettest November on record. Baltimore, wettest month on record, or wettest November on record here. So we've just been talking about nonstop rain, nonstop snow into ski country in northern parts of New England, upstate New York. But I think it's just interesting the fact that that trough has been so consistent. And again, even here with that ridge starting to break down out west, we're still seeing things staying on the cold side out east. So I think it's the consistency that stands out to me, at least in terms of what we've seen so far this winter. It's still late November, but it feels like we're in the middle of February based on this pattern.
Yeah, I mean, last week they broke a ton of records in the Northeast because of that cold air for Thanksgiving. I think it was like some of the coldest Thanksgiving days in the Northeast. So
yeah, Hartford got down to what, 13 degrees, their coldest November temperature on record.
Dang.
The Thanksgiving Day parade, that did, I don't know.
At least it wasn't snowing, right? Like
exactly. If it's snowing, you
and
got
windy.
that.
Yeah.
Would you by the way brave 25 degrees and 30-mile-an-hour winds to go watch the parade?
For the parade? I wouldn't go to that parade in general, just because, like, I don't know. I'm fine at home watching it. I don't think it's worth it. I like being at home for Thanksgiving, you know. And I feel like you have to deal with traffic. I sound like an old man.
I'm actually the same way. I grew up, as I mentioned, about 45 minutes north of New York City, and we never went to Thanksgiving Day parade. And nothing against it, you know, for people who go. I know there's a lot of people who do go and have a good time at it. That was never of appeal for me either. Yeah, especially when it's 25 out.
So this next winter storm is going to have like a warm part to it too, and a stormy part. Looks like some severe storms could fire up in the Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi area. We'll keep an eye on that on air and online. We'll have a lot of information for you there. Final story this week. We can't ignore this story. It was big. There was this big climate assessment, 4th edition, released. It was actually Black Friday when they released it, and a lot of people have been digging into it now. This report was written by a variety of federal agencies, professors in academia, and even folks from the private sector. And so it's very all-encompassing. Something that I noticed from this report is that it was really pinpointing how the people are being affected by climate and extreme weather, and how they're adapting to climate and severe weather. And I read at the end, it was sort of heartfelt at the end. They were saying how the purpose of the report was so that other communities could learn from how to adapt better and sort of learn from communities that they aren't actually a part of. So I thought that was really interesting. Any standouts for you for the report?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting in a lot of ways that it's the adaptability, and I think especially when it comes to farming communities, I know that there are certain types of plants, soybeans in the Midwest, that are going to be particularly, potentially would be affected. I mean, you think about places like California where 10 to 15 inches of rain will fall, but you need every drop of that. So any variation in that climate is really critical. Even here where we're sitting here in Denver, Colorado, we average 14.3 inches of rain a year. So if you get, we were actually kind of talking about this yesterday. If you get 5 inches of rain less or more in a place like New York City where you average 45 inches of rain a year, it could lead to some issues, but it's probably not going to be as pronounced as, say, here in eastern Colorado, which is a breadbasket for the country. If you are getting only 8 or 9 inches worth of rainfall, that's a huge difference opposed to 13, 14 inches. Or let's say you go on the other side of things, you're getting 19, 20 inches, you're talking about regular floods that damages the crop. I think the adaptability component to that report, I thought, was one of the things that really stood out to me. I'd be curious for you as well here, Dakota, because I think one of the things that I get reached out to the most, I have a lot of friends that are in farming here in eastern Colorado, and I get constant questions about moisture, how things are looking medium, long-term forecasting for farms. And so when I read this report, when I took a look at it, I thought that was one of the things that stood out was how farmers will have to adapt. I mean, if there is going to be a change in climate, as the report says there will be, then we will obviously have to make some changes to how we approach things.
Yeah. I know a lot of the climate models predict sort of some areas to see sort of mega droughts, larger droughts, but then when it does rain, it rains a lot more. So I think that's going to be an interesting and difficult sort of issue to tackle, especially from the farming standpoint. So yeah, if you haven't read that report, go check it out. It's a really long read. I didn't read the whole thing, but I sort of skimmed through it and read the bullet points. But there's a lot of good info in there. Check it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that does it for the top weather stories. If you have a suggestion on what we should talk about in the future, let us know. You can email at podcast@weathernationtv.com. Coming up, Chris and I are going to dive into some of our fondest memories of winter storms and nor'easters and being in snow that was taller than us. So stick around for that. But first, let's hear from John Van Pelt with his safety tip of the week.
Yeah, hey there, John Van Pelt back with this week's tip of the week, which is all about getting your home ready for wintertime. One of the things people forget is what to do outside of your house to make sure you're winterized fine, and one of those is disconnecting your hoses from faucets. If you don't have a freeze-free faucet, say that 10 times fast, you can actually freeze that faucet, which could burst and cause big leaks inside the house, so make sure you get all of your hoses disconnected outside the house. Now, if you're going to check your heating system outside and you know what you're doing, you need to check your burners, see if they're clean, and if you don't know what you're doing, call a professional, let them check that, and also make sure your indoor heat exchanger is in good shape. If you have propane or oil heat, if you're in the part of the country that uses tanks to have fuel, make sure that tank is full so you don't have to worry about it in the middle of a cold snap. And also, around your windows and doors outside, check for cracks and gaps. You can caulk the windows, you can put weather stripping on the doors, and that will save you a lot of money to get rid of those leaks, hot air leaking out and cold air leaking in. Also, outside the house, make sure your downspouts and gutters are clear of any obstructions. If they can't drain properly, they can freeze up. Those can cause ice dams, which can cause big problems on the roof, which can then leak inside the house. You don't want that to happen, obviously. Now, inside the house, good way to save money. Replace your heater filters every month. Not only will that save you money, but it gives you much cleaner air to breathe, which we all can use, right? If you haven't done it, insulate your attic and storage area doors. You can just put up some foam that you can get at any home improvement store. And here's a biggie. If you use space heaters, make sure you keep them away from drapes and bed coverings that could catch on fire. And if that heater uses fossil fuels like kerosene, make sure it's properly ventilated. And you need to have a carbon monoxide detector on every floor of your house. Check your smoke detectors too. If you didn't put fresh batteries in them when the clocks change, do that now. We'll have a lot more information on the full segment on WeatherNation TV 2, so join us there for more ways to get your house properly winterized.
Thank you, John. Every week coming up with the safety tip of the week. He's sort of the safety guy extraordinaire here. So thank you, as we lovingly call him, JVP. Thank you, JVP.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to say than John Van Pelt.
What is he call severe or the safety? He has a term for himself, which I made fun of him about because
I know what you're talking about.
I'm trying to think of it, but anyways, yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Great guy. Love him.
Love his tips. So Chris, we both grew up in the Northeast. I was more mid-Atlantic in Maryland. But we were just sort of chatting and realized that both of our loves and as a kid were watching these big winter storms and being out in the snow and getting off school. So why do you think you liked nor'easters so much? Why did you like the snow?
Well, this is actually something we were talking about yesterday as well. I think one of the standout things, somebody who didn't grow up in the Northeast, is how high impact snowstorms are. So, in the South and the Southeast, for obvious reasons, severe weather is what stands out. And across the West Coast, a big rain or wind event, high elevation snow event is what stands out. For the Northeast, there's these nor'easters. It is no joke that it is, if you're talking about a forecast for 6 to 12 inches of snow in New York City, in Boston, D.C., that all those cities come to a complete halt. That includes literally everything, so it has worldwide implications. So the stock market, comes to a halt. If Wall Street comes to close, usually, if you're talking about a forecast for 6 to 12 inches of snowfall. If that varies, if we're off by a few inches, maybe you get some mixing, and that's only 2 to 3 inches. Our fellow Northeasterners are not known for being shy, so we'll hear about it on Twitter-agram or whatever it is, and therefore it gets, I think, a bit more attention. So to answer your question, I think that snowstorms are especially high impact. You're talking about major, on a more serious note, major metro areas. New York City is 20, 25 million people, 100 square miles. So it means a lot of people are commuting in by car, by bus, and that if you're talking about 6 to 12 inches of snowfall, that means perhaps tens of millions of people can't get to work, and it really does shut down the economy there. Schools close, everything closes, and it's a complete shutdown. While we're in Denver, 6 to 12 inches of snow, life kind of goes on a bit more.
Yeah. That was it for me, the impact. That's
Yes,
why
the
I
impact.
liked it so much. 'Cause
Yes.
that means you're probably going to get off school. I lived in Maryland, so we had like an inch, basically, was where you're not going to school. But I used to predict if we were going to get off school or not. And I made a website, I had a Facebook page, and I would put out my predictions because so many people would be texting me and asking me like, hey, do you think like we're going to have school tomorrow? Like, should I do my homework? And blah, blah, blah. And I always said, no, don't do your homework to mess with them. But
I did the exact same thing.
Right? Yeah.
Literally the exact same thing. In fact, to your point, or to what you were saying there, I'm a little older than you, so I didn't have a Facebook page, but I had one of those, I think it was an Angel Fire website that I started up.
I don't even know what that is.
One of those like do-it-yourself like websites was the first thing I did, and because my mom got annoyed with me because the house phone, anytime we would get snow, would get blown up by people calling. Of course, this is just before cell phones. And so, like, freshman sophomore year of high school, people were like, are we going to have school tomorrow? And so, my last name is Bianchi, and so I called it AnkaCast. Anka was my nickname in high school. And Anka,
Nice.
so short for Bianchi. And so, I created an AnkaCast, which would predict whether or not we have school days. Problem was, I mean, not in a braggy sense, but I got pretty good at figuring it out because, over the course of 8-9 years living in my hometown, you figured out the trends of it's going to be 3-4 inches. Middle of the day, they'll probably do an early release. If it's 3-4 inches before the sun comes up, we'll probably get school off. But I got pretty good at figuring it out. And one time, my senior year of high school, I got it wrong. And I said it was going to be a school closing, and they ended up delaying. They brought us into school on a 2-hour delay, and I'm just sweating bullets because people wouldn't do their homework, and people would just be yelling at me and be like, I guess I got it wrong. I'm sorry, guys. And then we came in, and in fact, it continued to snow throughout the day, and they did like an early release or something, so I kind of got out of it. But anyways, it was...
You need people to sign like a legal release, like I'm not responsible for any homework. Yeah.
But same thing. I mean, again, it kind of goes back to the impacts. That's why nor'easter is so... again, if you're watching this from a different part of the country, these storms are so high impact. Cannot emphasize enough. I even think in Chicago, 6 to 12 inches of snow... I don't know. I mean, I don't have a great sense for what that would do there in Chicago, but I feel like a 6 to 12 inch snow in New York, it's so disruptive that there's not much like it.
Yeah, and that's something that I experienced when I came out here, how different everyone is. And I was always told that we got off of school in Maryland for an inch because we didn't have the resources. But when I came out here, they plow less out here than they plowed in Maryland. I feel like every road in Maryland had to be plowed for us to go to school. Out here, most of the side streets aren't even touched after like a 6-inch storm. And I think people just adapt and are maybe just more used to driving in that kind of weather and dealing with the snow and the ice.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's what it is?
I think that's what it is. I think the culture is more, people on weekends here in Colorado, for example, or I'm sure in other places across the West, right? What do they do on weekends? They go and ski. So that means if you're skiing in December and you want a good powder day, that means you're probably braving trickier than usual weather conditions get up there. You're taking a 4-wheel drive, but 4-wheel drive on up, let's say you're going up on Berthoud Pass here in Colorado. I don't know if anybody's ever been on Berthoud Pass. That's a bunch of switchbacks at 11,000 feet. It's not a lot of fun to drive on. High up, high down, switchbacks. So if you're doing some urban driving, maybe it doesn't feel quite as bad. And again, I think it's a culture component. While in New York or Boston or DC or Philadelphia, people aren't doing that quite as much. And if they are, they may be going to smaller ski resorts where the roads are probably a bit better or not as quite as treacherous. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I think that might play in, is that's just a part of the culture here, is that you go up and ski and you brave these difficult mountain passes because the reward is you get a great pow day, you're getting all that awesome snow, and first chair is going to be awesome for you, but that's just not the case out east, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That's just a guess on my part. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think that sounds right. I would also like to live in more places just to like see how, I'm sure if you go to Minnesota, like, and no big deal, and any of the sort of the Mountain West states, but if you get like a 1-inch snowstorm in the southeast, like Atlanta, then everything is just shut down. And so it's sort of interesting. Do you have any events that stick out with you, like big storms or maybe storms that were forecast poorly that stick out with you during your childhood?
The one that stands out was not necessarily during my childhood. There are two storms that kind of stand out. One was the blizzard in '96. It's probably the one that really, and I think for a lot.
I was there.
You were there
I was
too.
small, but I was there.
I was slightly bigger than you, but I was still small. I was 8 and really excited about that storm. That one helped prompt me get into weather because I remember that one distinctly. What that did, I think we got off school for 3 or 4 days, if I remember correctly there. That was in January 1996. I won't forget that one. More recently, and probably one of the stories I try and tell, I even mentioned this on the air before, was Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. I grew up in coastal Connecticut, right on the water, and my parents were in a mandatory evacuation zone for Hurricane Sandy. And by the way, we all know what a success that was in terms of forecasting. I think 3-4 days out, I remember the storm took place on a Monday, and that Friday my parents, where they lived, was ordered to be evacuated. And my parents didn't follow it for the first couple of days. In fact, they didn't follow the order, which for about 3-4 days, I tried to talk to them, tried to figure out how to get through to them that this was going to be a terrible storm. I think one of the things for the New York area that hung true, and I heard this repeatedly, was that Hurricane Irene had moved through the summer before, the previous September in 2011, and the impacts were underwhelming for the New York metro. I know it did a lot more damage into upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, but in New York immediately, there was a lot of alert there, and my parents, I think a lot of people felt there was a bit of a false alarm aspect to it. And so I tried to communicate that to them, that they were within a quarter mile of the water, where we grew up in coastal Connecticut. Anyways, that's one of my standout stories because, frankly, I failed in getting them out. Of course, they were totally fine, but they were without power for over a week. They told me, I mean, the water got within about a block or two of their house back in Connecticut, and I know that if there's another storm like that, they'll listen to me the next time they told me as much. So it was also a bit of a lesson for me in terms of how to communicate, and I might have been, frankly, a bit overly forceful with them, been like, you guys have to get out, and probably now I would take a slightly different tone. But anyways, it's one of the standout stories for me as a meteorologist, and that's the one that stands out for me as well.
So yeah, Sandy was sort of I don't want to call it a hybrid, but it was like transitioning. It was coming from tropical to extratropical, and in the end, it sort of hit that area like a real nasty nor'easter. Interesting. It's not a snow event though, really, right? Because they didn't get.
Yeah, there was. If I remember, it was down West Virginia. Some spots did pick up a couple feet of snow.
Yeah.
It wasn't a snow event. I mean, the snow event that stands out for me would be blizzard '96. There was a string of storms in 2003, 2004.
I'm actually going to quiz you on some of those. So
really?
I hope you're ready for that.
Oh gosh, I should have refreshed my memory on that one. But that's also because that was my sophomore and junior year of high school. That helped my Angel Fire website get prominence. In fact, one quick side story to that was in 2004, one of the local meteorologists, Bill Evans, who's still a meteorologist at ABC7, saw I got featured in the local paper for it.
Nice.
He saw me and he invited me into the station. I did the weather, and I was just like sweating bullets and just so
cool.
nervous. And so they brought me on air in New York.
That was really nice of him.
Yeah, it was very nice of him, and I will never forget that. And obviously, Bill Evans kept in touch with him. He's a great guy. And but anyways, I digress.
Yeah. So I have a ton of stories that I could go into. I won't dig into them. We'll save that for another show. So being out here, has your interest in snow shifted at all? Because I know you're a big ski guy. Is that what you're looking for now when you get these big snowstorms? Like, are you looking for some fresh powder out in, I don't know where you go, Copper, Breckenridge?
Gosh, that's a great question, Dakota, because I think it's shifted in two different ways. I think what I love about Colorado, and one of the things that I really enjoy about the weather here specifically, I think you probably feel the same way, is it is so challenging to forecast here. It is so hyper-local. Not getting too far into the weeds here. When the jet stream gets involved here, it just screws everything up. And the forecast, even today, I mean, we've got mountain wave clouds, which are very difficult to forecast. You can really only forecast those within about 12, max 18 hours out. And if you get a mountain wave cloud like we got today, might have well have called for beautiful blue sunny skies, and you get this cloud that sits over you, and so that drops your forecast by 10 degrees. You're off. You're getting yelled at. Your Twitter looks awful, and you got to stay away from it for the day. But it's also the fun part of it too. And these mountain resorts, forecasting for skiing is pretty difficult. I mean, there's such subtle differences in terrain. There's such here in Colorado, obviously, central and western parts of the state. You get little nooks and crannies. You got to think about the orientation of the mountain range. The San Juans will get totally different snow event. If it rains in Los Angeles, will probably snow, for example, in Durango and Telluride. But Steamboat Springs got a Bluebird day.
Yeah.
So I love that aspect to it in terms of how challenging it is. So I think that's where my interest has shifted. It's more on a forecasting, on a strictly nerdy side of things.
Yeah.
Figuring out where it's going to snow and when. And when you get it right here in Colorado, or especially when you kind of nail it, it feels extra good. I don't know if you feel that way, but it's hard, isn't it?
One thing I noticed is that you can't visualize the storm nearly as much because the low pressure does that transfer when it jumps over the Rockies, and then the precip shield just sort of forms all of a sudden, and then you're also trying to think about where the upslope's going to happen, and at least that's sort of predictable. If you can predict the wind direction, then you can get the upslope part of it. But I just remember visualizing nor'easters. You could see the massive precip shield coming your way, and then the only real thing was trying to figure out where that low is going to form off the coast. But out here, it seems harder to visualize and harder to forecast for sure. One thing I've noticed, and this is just an anecdote, is that I feel like people care less when the forecast busts out here. At least, I don't know about skiers, but I feel like people just go into work, they're like, oh, we got snow. They didn't say there's going to be snow, whatever. I remember there was one storm where there was 2 inches forecast, and then 24 hours later, we got a foot. And it was, people were probably not happy, but it was not that big of a deal. If that happens on the East Coast, there's an outcry.
And to that, what was that New York event that we had
just recently?
The Thursday where it ended up with 6 inches of snow, and I think the forecast might have been for slightly less, but the forecast was basically on there in New York. I remember saying on the air here on WeatherNation the day before, I can't sign your release form, but I'm telling you as a weather guy that you should probably use mass transit or get out of work early on Thursday, because I said that on the day before. And again, not in a braggy sense, but this was an event that was put out there. I texted all my family and friends back east and about that specific event. And what was it? De Blasio, Chris Christie were all up in arms about the forecast. And I thought the forecast legitimately did a very good job, and they called for it basically exactly. Anyways, I thought it was a...
the traffic and accidents were terrible in that event.
It was awful. And again, sometimes we have to think about something I try and keep in mind. It's kind of difficult because we all have slightly different hours than the average person, but you have to think about it in terms of how the average person is going to relate to it. So, if it's going to snow 3 to 6 inches in New York, but it's on a Saturday afternoon, that's going to have a completely different impact than 1 to 2 inches on a Monday morning. And I think we have to, I think we do a pretty good job of that here at WeatherNation, where we do emphasize what is the impact to you. If you're driving home and you're talking about 1 to 2 inches of snow at 7:30 in the morning on a Monday. We learned that with the Snowpocalypse event in Atlanta. What was that, 2 inches of snow? But in a place that's not used to it. Snowpocalypse. Or what was it? What was it?
I don't know.
They have a nickname for it.
Snowmageddon. There's a lot of nicknames.
People took 20 hours to get home, and I think people died. But we've got to just say, hey, if you can, you got a lenient boss. The nerd on the TV is telling us get out of work a little early, and that's one of the things I try and emphasize in my communication when I'm talking on the air at WeatherNation.
What people are going to be doing.
Well, yeah.
That's a huge field right now in meteorology, is the social science of how people are perceiving weather information. Because there are a few things that are harder to predict than the weather. One of them is people. That's like a sort of a saying that I've heard quite often in the social science world.
To that, I think it's really important to realize how young of a science meteorology is and how young of a field it is. I mean, what was it, 130 years ago, the main scientists in the field were Cuban priests. They were the leading hurricane forecasters. You remember before true story.
What?
The Galveston storm in 1900, and because of the high impacts to Central America in particular, or I should say the Caribbean and Central America, in the late 1800s, a lot of the pioneers for figuring out wind direction, whether or not a storm might hit, were Cuban priests. I'm not kidding about this.
I have never heard this.
Isaac Storm, the book does mentions that in
Yeah.
little bits of detail, but meteorology is still a relatively young field.
Did they verify or?
Apparently they did a pretty good job. I haven't gone back and done any case studies on it, but
I think we need to do that.
but they were apparently pretty good at what they did and figured out they could tell you, a few hours in advance whether or not you'd be looking at a big storm. Again, I don't want to get into too much of the detail on that because I don't know a ton about it.
That's fascinating to me.
But the whole point of that is that it is a young field.
Yeah.
We're still figuring it out, and especially with technology. Technology is accelerating both in terms of improving weather forecasts, but also in terms of how we consume the forecasts. 10 years ago, who would have thought that we'd pick up a little phone and scroll through, our apps, and that's how we, 80-90% of people get their weather now, right?
Yeah. I mean, just think about the past 3 years. We've been introduced to this awesome suite of satellites, GOES 16 and GOES 17, and just that data is transforming our forecasts. And for me, it's transforming how I see the weather, because none of us were ever able to see the detail in these big storms or these hurricanes or banding and snowfall events. This is a rabbit hole. We could go
Totally.
down that rabbit hole. Maybe we'll dedicate a whole episode to technology and weather, because honestly, a few episodes. Let's be honest. But thanks for doing this and talking with me, and it was cool to talk about winter storms and how you get a little nostalgic. That's always fun. Every week we're gonna have a guest in this sort of spot, but because this is a new show, I was hoping to introduce the co-host as well. So thanks for doing that, Chris. Appreciate
Absolutely. No, it was a pleasure.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And anytime you want to geek out about nor'easters, I'm always here.
Well, stick around, because up next, I'm going to grill you on some trivia, some weather trivia.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
Ready for that?
I think so. I hope so.
Cool.
I hope so.
You're listening to the WeatherNation podcast. To tune into more WeatherNation coverage, you can watch live programming on Amazon Fire, Roku, and any of your favorite streaming services.
Okay, welcome back to the WeatherNation podcast. I got some trivia for you here, Chris. I have 3 questions. If you get 2 out of 3, you win. If you don't, you lose.
Oh boy. Okay, what do I get?
Stakes are high.
I get steak?
No, you get chocolate. Is what I've been offering. What I offered Mary last week. So
I'll take it.
yeah.
All right.
All right. Up first, Chicago O'Hare International Airport received 8.4 inches of snow in last week's snowstorm, giving them 12 inches for the month. This sets the record for the most snowfall at Chicago O'Hare in the month of November. What was the previous record? And when did it occur? That's a bonus if you get that.
Oh.
One note on this is that the O'Hare data record only goes back to 1958, so it didn't set the record for Chicago, just that site.
Just the O'Hare
just
site.
so you're clear. It's multiple choice. So
Ooh.
the new record is 12 inches, okay,
'Kay.
for the month
Okay.
of November. Was the most recent record A, 11.2 inches, B, 10.3, C, 9.5, or D, 8.9?
I'm going to go with A, 11.2.
Ding, ding, ding.
Really?
You
All
got
right.
it. Nicely done.
All right.
11.2 inches in 2015, so pretty recently. Just behind that is 10.4 in 1959. The interesting thing about that 2015 record is that the 11.2 came from all one storm.
I was going to say that. I remember that storm.
Do you?
I remember that storm because it was a big deal in Chicago. I was here at WeatherNation for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, they got
Okay.
11.2 inches.
Do you have what day it was by chance?
Shoot, I don't. I'm pretty sure it was late
Okay.
November. Yeah, I have here late November. So the actual record in Chicago, the total, because they move sites a lot, recording sites, and so the record goes actually back to the 1800s, and that's actually 14.8 for the month of November in all of Chicago.
Okay.
But for the airport, it's 11.2. Yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, up next. So we talked quite a bit about nor'easters, but do you know which nor'easter is considered the strongest or most impactful? Let's go with most impactful. And I'm basing this off the Northeast storm scale that they use, that Paul Cosin and Louis Uccellini developed. All right, so another multiple choice. The blizzard of '96, which we talked about, dropped a widespread 30 inches of snow across Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. The blizzard of 2016 rocked the mid-Atlantic with a widespread 2+ feet of snow. Superstorm of '93, it dropped 10 inches from Alabama all the way to Maine, and more snow than that in a few places. And then D, the President's Day storm number 2 in 2003, which plastered cities from DC to Boston with over 15 inches of the white stuff. Fun fact, I was in all of these storms. You might have been.
Yeah, except for the
2016
one I was not.
I actually flew out to go to I was living out here, and I flew out. I took a week off of grad school. I was like, sorry, advisor, I'm not going to be here. Because it was so far out, the models nailed it. So anyways.
How much did your house get, by the way, from that one?
We got 27.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the biggest I've ever had at my house. Yeah, 27. So I was glad I did it, because my dad would have been bragging the whole time.
Yeah.
All right, so 96, 2016, Superstorm in 93, or President's Day storm number 2 in 2003. So think about the impact of the storm.
I know it's either, I'm pretty sure it's either 2016 or 93. 2016 now impacts, and I should be a bit more familiar with the scale, but I remember the 2016 storm was on a weekend, and I wonder if that impacts.
It's just population based.
It's just
population based and snowfall based.
Well, I think it had to be 93, wouldn't it?
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. That's it.
Just because Atlanta got a foot out of that, if I remember.
Yeah.
Atlanta got a foot.
I mean, almost to the Gulf Coast, I think, got snow. Not a lot, but which is super rare. There was also a storm side of that derecho went through. I think it was Florida. It went through, or maybe
so, yeah.
It might have been even more south than that in the Caribbean. So that storm's crazy. I don't know if we'll ever see one like that again. I wish I had the pressure recording for that, because I'm interested what it ended up dropping down to. So nice job. You got that one right.
So I'm at chocolate already.
You're at chocolate. I don't know what you get if you get them all right. I haven't figured that out yet. Okay, final question. The term blizzard is a common word to describe harsh snowstorms. Even now, the National Weather Service has a technical definition of blowing snow from winds in an excess of 35 miles per hour, creating visibility of a quarter mile or less, and that has to be sustained for 3 hours. So we use this term a lot. It's technical. But when was the term blizzard actually first used?
Ooh.
A Boston newspaper used the term after the Great Blizzard of 1888, when tropical storm force winds combined with feet of snow to create quite the mess. Or B, a New York magazine coined the term after the North American blizzard of 1947 that dumped 26.5 inches of snow in Central Park. Or C, an Iowan newspaper first used the word in 1870 after a hard-hitting snowstorm moved across the Great Plains. Or D, TMZ first used the word to describe Vanilla Ice's hit single Ice Ice Baby as a beautiful blizzard in songwriting.
Oh, I only wish it could be. Oh, I could only wish it was Ice Ice Baby. I'm going to go with the Iowa one just because.
I can't stump you. You got it right.
Well, because it's a French word, right? And so I would. Anyways.
Well, so it actually, I was doing some reading about this, and the origin is not super clear. They know when it was first used in media, but they think it's like because of war, like how fast, like a blitzkrieg.
Blitzkrieg, right?
Blitzkrieg, yeah. They think that's sort of the origin of it.
Huh.
But there is like a lot of like iffy, like where did it actually come from? Like who started talking about it more? They know when the first media used it, but they don't know like which group of people started using it the most.
Okay.
Yeah.
So could you repeat? Sorry, the Iowa.
Yeah,
reference?
yeah. It was just a snowstorm in 1870. A newspaper used the word that it didn't seem like it was, it was a bad storm, but it wasn't like a giant like any of the ones before. By the way, all those were real events that I had in A and B. They just weren't when the.
Will you go out and get me a blizzard now that I got all three of those right?
From Dairy Queen?
Yeah.
We gotta get a Dairy Queen sponsor first.
Yeah. That's next week's
Yeah,
episode.
that's next week. Yeah. So good job, 3 out of 3. So that's
thanks.
impressive. I clearly have to make more challenging questions.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, the last one was a pure guess, but
Well done.
I figured it had something to do with the French, and I know the French were doing the fur
Settled
trapping around
in-
there.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I know it was a long time ago, but they.
That's pretty good. That's like
That was my
some
guess.
good context and educated guessing.
I can't imagine there were too many French hanging out in Boston in 1888 or in New York in 1947.
That's
so.
a good point.
Anyways.
Yeah. All right. Well done. That does it for the show.
Okay.
Just a few housekeeping things here. We're a new podcast, and we want as many people as possible to listen. So give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening. And also subscribe so this show pops up in your feed that we're going to put out every week. And we're aiming for Wednesday for the release day. If you liked any of the video or audio that we played, if you're watching on YouTube, you can find the full versions on our TV programming or on our website, weathernationtv.com. And finally, if you're just listening to this podcast, like I do, I only really listen to podcasts, you can find the video version on our YouTube page. Just look up Weather Nation on YouTube. But thanks so much for being here this week. I'm Dakota Smith alongside Chris Bianchi, and we'll see you next week.